Hello friends, welcome to SAP Workflow session. In the first chapter, we will have an introduction to business workflow. Let's understand what is SAP Business Workflow. In terms of definition, SAP Business Workflow is a cross-application tool that makes it possible to integrate business processes and tasks between the application. This tool was first introduced in R3 release 3.0 and received a substantial facelift in the Engine release 4.6. Let's understand why we need SAP Workflow. Because it's a tool to automate the business process and it's not tied up to any particular application. It operates uniformly across the application. It can coordinate all participating tasks by providing active support to the users. The last point, which is most important point, deadline management is possible. We will try to understand what all are these useful steps and why we need SAP workflow in terms of definitions and in terms of with reference to examples in the coming sessions. Let's understand what all are the uses of workflow. A workflow management system can process and monitor well-structured process that contain a sequence of activities and reoccur in the same or similar forms, which involves several people or group of people wherever it requires a considerable coordination. Let's take a simple example. Whenever an employee of any of the organization wanted to apply a leave, what he does, he goes to a tool, internal tool or internal site, and he applies for a leave on a specific day. As soon as he applies for a leave, it goes for the approval to his immediate manager. After his approval, it goes to HR manager. After her approval, it goes to that's end of the workflow, where it deducts the leave from his leave balance and it marks a particular day as a leave. So if you take this example, you have a sequence of activities that call applying a leave and approval or deduction of a leave. It's all activities. Whenever you wanted to combine all these activities, you need a workflow. And the second point is reoccur in the same or similar forms. If you take an approval process here, approval is a repetitive activity, but in terms of the person who acts on it is a different person. But when it comes to a activity, it's the same activity with different people. So in this way, it involves several people or a group of people. And wherever you need a considerable coordination, in this simple example, if you take, you need a coordination where you need to coordinate with your manager and your HR manager. In these kind of cases, you need the workflow, and it provides a coordination between all these users. Let's understand what are the boundaries of workflow. The component uses the existing transactions and function modules. The functionality and operability of existing transactions and function modules are neither changed nor restricted by the workflow control. SAP Business Workflow does not intervene in the programming process within a transaction. It means in the workflow you can use the existing standard transactions or custom transaction or standard function modules or your own developed function modules. You can use all these directly in the workflow. Workflow will neither change of the functionality of the transactions or the function modules, and another way is it uses the functionality of these transactions in the workflow. That means it is not going to change any of the existing standard transaction if you are going to use inside the workflow. The component makes the R3 system easier to operate, which is particularly useful for inexperienced or occasional users, and the workflow is very much useful for the inexperienced or occasional users. Let's understand what is the need of workflow. If you take a business example, a business process can contain several steps. Historically, the tasks have been coordinated manually or some informal means of communication like a sticky note, email, shouting or phone calls. The common problem in all these approaches is inefficiency, and each lacks a way to trace where a task is and who executed or who is executing it, how much time it requires. In all these cases, if you wanted to coordinate between the task and between the people, you need a workflow. In contrast, the workflow ensures the right work is sent to the right person at the right time, at the right sequence, with the right information. Let's understand what is workflow management system. A system that delivers work in the correct sequence with all the information at the correct time to the correct responsible people. That's where we define a system as workflow management system. What all are the advantages for the management if we implement the workflow in your organization? It can have a better control over the information, deadlines, service levels, and process costs. And what is the flexibility whenever you wanted to change the workflow? Because the process, whenever there is a change in the process, you will have a much flexibility whenever you use the workflow. And whenever there is a change in the organizational structure, it is very flexible to change in the workflow and the underlying technology whenever there is a change in the technology, and that in that time also you can use the workflow, and that provides the flexibility. What are the advantages for the enterprises whenever you implement the workflow? It increases the production, it speeds up the process, it increases customer satisfaction. When we say increases the production, you take any of the example wherever you need a coordination between the people or between the process. It all automates the business process and the coordination. So that's where people no need to rush to the other person and ask for the activity, or to pick up a phone and call the people and to tell them what they're supposed to do. Those kind of all activities you can reduce it. In that way you can increase the production and you can speed up the process in the same way, and ultimately it increases the customer satisfaction and as well as the employee satisfaction. Let's take another example of wherever you need a workflow. In this example, we are trying to show whenever you have a new customer in your organization. Let's take whenever you have a new customer, which is very valuable customer to your organization, you will arrange a visit for the customer across your organization so that the customer can visit and see what is the process going on and how you can benefit the customer with your supply with your products. So, and then once the customer is happy and satisfied, and then you need to adjust certain limits in your organization, how much you can adjust the limit for the customer, and what is the account, and what is the address details, all those details you have to maintain your system. And if you wanted to apply any special plan, whenever you wanted to sell a product to the customer, if you wanted to have a special plan to the customer, you can maintain all this. So how you are going to maintain all these things? You can define a process in your organization saying, okay, when you are adding a new customer, first step is arrange a visit, and the next step is adjust the credit limit, and the last one is define the plan. So all these things, if you wanted to track it manually, yes, it will be a very tough job and very difficult. Let's define a process using a workflow. Whenever you are trying to define a customer in your system, okay, what is the first step, and then go to the next step, and what is the last step? Automate all these processes. That's where the workflow is required. This is the introduction, more or less introduction for SAP Business Workflow. In the chapter 2, we will understand the business workflow architecture. Let's see how we are going to define a workflow project. So whenever you wanted to implement any workflow in your organization, first understand the business process. Business process is going to play a key role in any of the workflow implementation. First understand and identify the business process. Once you identify that, let's find out whether you have any standard workflow to support that business process, or you need to customize the process or customize the workflow. If you have a standard workflow for that business process, let's use the same thing which SAP has provided as a standard workflow. If you don't have, what needs to be done? You need to create a workflow and then implement the workflow and test the workflow. Testing will play a major role in the workflow implementation. When it comes to workflow architecture, you have three important blocks. One is organization, and the one is process, and the last one is business object. We will try to understand about each block in the coming session, but let's try to have a brief introduction of what all are these blocks and how it is going to play a major role in the workflow. When you say organization, role, task, position, or a job or organizational unit, all these can be combined under organization. This defines who is executing a processing task or who is the responsible for a particular activity. So if you look back at our previous example, the manager who is the approver, or HR manager who is the approver. So those people will be part of organizational structure because they are the people who are executing a workflow. And the next one is a process. The workflow definition and step will be grouped under process. In this step, it defines the process, which process has to happen in the next step. So when you apply a leave, it sends out an email to your immediate manager saying, okay, someone has applied for a leave. If you are okay, just approve it. That process will be part of the workflow definition or a step. And the last, the workflow will detect a leave from your leave balance. That's also called a process. That's also you can group under process section. The last one is a business object. Attributes, events, methods, objects, all these can be grouped under business objects. So what exactly a business object does? All services are provided in the form of executable methods. So when you say you are defining a process, but how to execute that process? Yes, that is possible with reference to business object. That's where the business object plays a major role in the workflow architecture. What are the each task of different process or different blocks in the workflow management system? Let's take the first one is process definition. In the process, what happens in what order? The workflow builder and task definition are responsible for these activities. And the next one is organizational modeling. Who does what? That's where organizational model and role definition comes in the picture. The last one is the application encapsulation. In this, which objects are required for your process definition or your workflow development? Business object builder, business object repository will play a key role in this. Let's look at this workflow definition architecture. In this organization, this screen, we are trying to show which one can be used, which method. If you take the process section where you have a workflow definition or step, the workflow definition can be a combination of steps. Whenever you have a different activities, if you wanted to group them together, then it becomes a workflow definition. Workflow definition can use a task directly on attributes of business objects and events. A step can use attributes, events, methods, and tasks. That's how the workflow definition or workflow architecture is defined. When we go into the next chapter, we will try to understand how the each step or each process is going to dependent on other process, how it can use the other process to execute the workflow or continue the business process. Thank you.